Moving into a new home is supposed to be a fresh start. It's a chance to leave the past behind, to build new memories, and to shape a future filled with possibilities. But what if the walls of your dream home harbored secrets too horrifying to imagine? What if the very foundation of your sanctuary was steeped in untold nightmares, waiting to make you a part of its sinister story? Each house has a history, but some histories refuse to stay buried. These aren't just tales spun to thrill or scare. These are accounts of real-life nightmares experienced by those who dared to cross the thresholds of their new homes. The chilling experiences of these individuals reveal a truth that's hard to ignore. Some places are better left untouched, their stories left untold. In this collection, we will delve into the harrowing accounts of three new homeowners whose lives were forever changed by the dark secrets of their abodes. Each story is a descent into terror, a journey into the unknown, where safety and reason give way to chaos and fear. These tales are not for the faint of heart. They will make you question what lurks behind closed doors and whether the comfort of home is truly what it seems. The old Buick creaked and groaned as it turned onto Hollow Creek Lane, its headlights cutting through the thick mist that clung to the road like a restless spirit. Michael and Sarah Whitaker, newlyweds with dreams of starting fresh, had pooled their savings to buy the grand Victorian house at the end of the lane. The price was shockingly low, and despite the murmurs of the real estate agent about local legends, they couldn't resist the allure of the sprawling property. Michael, a historian with a love for old architecture, was enchanted by the house's ornate gables, stained glass windows, and intricate woodwork. Sarah, an artist, saw endless inspiration in its weathered charm. But as the couple approached, the house loomed before them, shrouded in shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, though her voice quavered. She chalked it up to nerves. The neighbors greeted them with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Mrs. Hargrove, a frail woman who lived across the street, clutched Michael's hand tightly as she welcomed them. "Such a brave young couple," she said, her watery blue eyes flickering to the house. "I hope you'll be happy here." Inside, the house was a mix of beauty and decay. The grand staircase twisted upward like a spine, its banister carved with vines and roses. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, but the air was heavy, oppressive, carrying a faint, metallic tang. As they unpacked, Sarah began to notice peculiarities. A floorboard creaked when no one stepped on it. The wallpaper in the dining room appeared to ripple, as though it were breathing. Michael dismissed her concerns as an overactive imagination, but unease crept into his own thoughts when he found the basement door locked with a heavy rusted chain. "We'll get to it later," he said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. The first night, Sarah woke to a faint tapping sound. She lay still, straining her ears. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from inside the walls. Michael mumbled in his sleep, oblivious. In the morning she searched the house but found nothing amiss. She convinced herself it was just the old pipes settling. But the next night, the sound returned, louder this time, and when she finally worked up the courage to press her ear to the wall, she heard something else, a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably mournful. Michael, meanwhile, stumbled upon a journal tucked behind a false panel in the study. The leather cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. The entries, written in a spidery hand, chronicled the life of a man named Elias Mercer, the house's original owner. At first, the journal was mundane, accounts of daily life, business dealings, and family matters. But as Michael read further, the tone grew darker. Elias wrote of strange occurrences, of voices and shadows that tormented his family. The final entry ended abruptly, smeared with ink as though written in a frenzy. Sarah's artwork began to change. Her usual bright landscapes gave way to dark, chaotic scenes filled with twisted figures and blood-red skies. She claimed she didn't remember painting them. One night, as they lay in bed, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Michael grabbed a flashlight and crept out, but the corridor was empty. The footsteps continued, leading him to the locked basement door. He swore he saw the chain tremble, as if something on the other side was testing its strength. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael delved into local archives. He discovered that Elias Mercer's wife and children had vanished one night, and shortly afterward, Elias was found dead in the locked basement. The house had been sold and resold over the years, each owner leaving under mysterious circumstances. Meanwhile, Sarah's connection to the house deepened. She began to have vivid dreams of a family in 19th-century attire, their faces gaunt and haunted. She often awoke screaming, her nightgown soaked in sweat. One day, while exploring the attic, she found an old photograph of the Mercer family. Her blood ran cold. These were the people from her dreams. The couple decided to break the chain on the basement door. The air that wafted up was icy, carrying the stench of mildew and something fouler. The basement was a cavernous space lined with crumbling brick walls. In the center stood a heavy wooden table, stained dark. Shackles hung from the walls, and a ring of candles, long extinguished, circled the room. On the table lay a journal, similar to the one Michael had found. This one detailed Elias Mercer's descent into madness. He believed his family was possessed by an entity that fed on their fear. To save them, he had performed a ritual, but it had gone horribly wrong. The entity that haunted the Mercer family was still in the house, and it had chosen Michael as its next vessel. He began to change, his once gentle demeanor replaced by violent outbursts and cold detachment. Sarah tried to reach him, but he was slipping away. One stormy night, the entity's full power erupted. The house came alive, doors slamming and windows shattering. The walls bled a thick black ichor, and the whispers turned to deafening screams. Michael, fully possessed, attacked Sarah, dragging her to the basement. The entity intended to complete the ritual it had started with Elias. Sarah fought back with everything she had, using the knowledge she'd gleaned from the journals to disrupt the ritual. She overturned the table, breaking the circle of power. The entity shrieked, its form briefly visible, a towering shadow with hollow eyes and clawed hands. The house began to collapse, flames licking at the walls. Sarah managed to drag Michael out just as the structure caved in. Michael had no memory of what happened. He was a shell of his former self, haunted by nightmares and plagued by guilt. Sarah, too, bore scars, both physical and emotional. They left Hollow Creek Lane, but the house remained in their dreams, a dark stain on their souls. Months later, as they tried to rebuild their lives, Sarah saw a news report. The house on Hollow Creek Lane was being rebuilt, its ashes barely cold. She felt a chill run down her spine. The curse wasn't gone. It was waiting. The final shot of the story pans out from the house's skeletal remains, where a shadow moves across the charred ground. And then, faintly, the sound of tapping begins again. The Danvers family arrived at the old house on Whispering Lane just before sunset. The moving truck trundled up the gravel driveway, its engine groaning under the weight of their belongings. The house, a large colonial-era structure, stood at the end of the lane like a sentinel, its chipped white paint and sagging shutters giving it an air of quiet resignation. James and Melissa Danvers had moved from the city to escape the mounting pressures of their lives. James had recently lost his job, and Melissa hoped that the change of scenery would rekindle their marriage. Their 8-year-old son, Ethan, was less enthused. He clung to his stuffed bear, staring up at the house with wide eyes. "It'll be an adventure," Melissa said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The faint smell of mothballs and damp wood hung in the air. As they unpacked, Ethan wandered off to explore. He found a hidden door behind a curtain in the living room. Beyond it was a narrow staircase leading to the attic. The space was empty except for an old wooden rocking chair and faded drawings scrawled on the walls. Ethan ran his fingers over the faint, childlike images, stick figures, houses, and swirling shapes. That night, as the family settled in, Melissa noticed something odd. The house seemed to amplify every sound. The creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the old grandfather clock, and the rustle of leaves outside all seemed unnaturally loud, as if the house itself were listening. The first whisper came on the second night. Melissa was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she heard it, a faint, sibilant sound. She froze, straining to hear. It came again, just at the edge of perception, a hushed voice that seemed to emanate from the walls. "James," she called, but he was upstairs putting Ethan to bed. In the days that followed, the whispers grew more distinct. At first, they were unintelligible, like a foreign language spoken in a breathy tone. But soon, Melissa began to catch fragments of words. Help, trapped, watching. She told James, but he dismissed her concerns, attributing them to stress and the house's age. Ethan, too, seemed affected. He became withdrawn, spending hours in the attic, drawing on the walls with crayon. His drawings grew more elaborate and disturbing. A faceless figure standing over a bed, shadowy shapes surrounding a crying child, and a swirling vortex consuming a stick-figure family. One evening, Melissa dreamt of the faceless figure. In her dream, it stood at the foot of her bed, its featureless head tilted as if observing her. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream had felt so real. She reached for James, but his side of the bed was empty. She found him in the living room, staring at the wall. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I thought I heard something," he murmured, his eyes glazed. "It was calling my name." Desperate for answers, Melissa visited the local library. The house's history was a grim catalogue of misfortune. Built in the early 1800s, it had once been part of a larger estate that served as an asylum for the mentally ill. The asylum's owner, Dr. Silas Greaves, was rumored to have conducted unethical experiments on his patients. The asylum burned down in 1873, but the house remained. Over the years, its inhabitants reported strange occurrences, voices, moving objects, and violent outbursts among the residents. Several families had abandoned the property, leaving it vacant for decades. Melissa's neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Cromwell, confirmed the stories. "That house has always been cursed," she said, her hands trembling around a cup of tea. "The walls remember, you see. They remember everything." Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior grew more alarming. He began talking to an invisible friend he called the Whisper Man. He claimed the man lived in the walls and told him secrets. One day, Melissa found Ethan's stuffed bear torn apart, its button eyes removed. When she confronted him, he said, "The Whisper Man doesn't like it watching him." James, too, seemed to be unraveling. He grew irritable and distant, spending long hours in the basement. Melissa found him one night, hunched over an old journal he'd discovered. It belonged to Dr. Greaves and detailed his experiments. The entries became increasingly erratic, describing how the asylum's walls absorbed the anguish of its patients, turning the house into a vessel for their torment. The house's activity reached a fever pitch. Walls bled a dark, viscous fluid. Shadows moved independently of the light. The whispers became screams, echoing through the halls. Melissa woke one night to find Ethan missing. She followed his voice to the attic, where he stood before the wall, his crayon poised above a half-finished drawing. The faceless figure loomed large on the plaster, its outstretched hands reaching for Ethan. "He says I have to finish," Ethan murmured, his voice distant. "No!" Melissa screamed, grabbing him and pulling him away. The walls trembled, and the figure seemed to shift, its featureless face turning toward her. James appeared, his face pale and haunted. "It won't let us go," he whispered. "We're part of it now." Determined to save her family, Melissa remembered the journal's final entry. Dr. Greaves had written of a ritual to seal the house's memory. It required a sacrifice. Melissa realized with horror that the house wanted Ethan, but she wouldn't let it have him. In a desperate act, Melissa set the attic ablaze. The fire spread quickly, the house's groans sounding almost like screams. She dragged Ethan and James outside as the flames consumed the structure. They watched as the house collapsed, its whispers finally silenced. The Danvers family moved far away, settling in a small apartment in the city. But the scars of Whispering Lane lingered. Ethan refused to speak about what had happened, his once bright demeanor dulled. James attended therapy, but his dreams were plagued by the faceless figure. Melissa threw herself into her work, painting vibrant, hopeful scenes as a way to combat the darkness that still lingered in her mind. One day, while unpacking a box, Melissa found one of Ethan's drawings from the house. It depicted their family standing in front of the colonial home, but in the window, a faceless figure stared out. She burned the drawing, but at night she swore she could still hear whispers in the walls. The group of 5 friends stood on the overgrown lawn, staring at the house as if it were a treasure chest waiting to be opened. The estate sale had been a lucky find for Alex, the de facto leader of their group. He had an eye for antiques and a passion for flipping historic homes. This sprawling Victorian manor, with its peeling paint and cracked windows, promised endless possibilities. "This place is incredible," Claire said, her voice tinged with awe. She snapped a photo, the camera's flash briefly illuminating the weathered facade. "It's a bit creepy," murmured Sophie, clutching her jacket tighter. She was the cautious one, always the voice of reason in their adventure. "Creepy is good," Alex replied, flashing a grin. "That's where the value is. Buyers love a place with character." Dan and Marcus, the other 2 members of their group, lugged the first boxes of supplies into the house. The interior was a time capsule of faded grandeur. Ornate chandeliers hung from cracked ceilings, and dust-coated furniture sat like forgotten sentinels in dimly lit rooms. As they explored, Marcus stumbled upon a trapdoor in the kitchen. "Hey guys, check this out," he called. The group gathered around as Alex pried it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, a draft of cold air wafting up. "Looks like a cellar," Alex said, his excitement palpable. "Let's check it out." The cellar was vast, its stone walls slick with moisture. Wooden shelves lined one side, laden with dusty jars. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, surrounded by an assortment of strange objects: a tarnished knife, a collection of melted candles, and a book bound in cracked leather. Sophie shivered. "This feels wrong. Let's go back upstairs." But Alex was already leafing through the book. "Look at this," he said, holding it up. The pages were filled with strange symbols and handwriting that seemed to crawl across the paper. In the days that followed, the group worked tirelessly to clean and restore the house, but the cellar's discovery lingered in their minds, particularly for Alex. He became obsessed with the book, spending hours deciphering its contents. It spoke of rituals, summoning, and a powerful entity known only as the Dweller. At first, the strange occurrences were subtle. Claire heard faint whispers while photographing the parlor. Marcus swore he saw shadows moving in the corners of his vision. Sophie's unease grew, but Alex dismissed their concerns. "Old houses make noises," he said, "and shadows, well, that's just your imagination." But one night, as they sat around the fireplace, a low, guttural growl echoed from the cellar. The group froze. "What the hell was that?" Dan whispered. Alex grabbed a flashlight. "Let's find out." They descended into the cellar together, their footsteps hesitant. The air was colder than before, the draft carrying a faint metallic tang. The growl came again, louder this time, reverberating off the walls. "It's probably an animal," Alex said, though his voice lacked conviction. The source of the sound seemed to be the far wall. As they approached, they noticed something strange. A series of deep scratches carved into the stone, forming an intricate pattern. "This wasn't here before," Claire said, her voice trembling. Sophie turned to Alex. "We need to leave. Now." But Alex's eyes were fixed on the scratches, a look of fascination replacing his fear. "We've got to figure out what this is." The growls became a nightly occurrence, accompanied by the sound of dragging chains. Sleep eluded the group, their nerves fraying with each passing day. Alex grew increasingly erratic, claiming the book held the key to understanding the house's secrets. One night, he convinced the others to join him in performing a ritual described in the book. "If we can summon whatever's here, we can banish it," he reasoned. Sophie protested vehemently, but the others, desperate for answers, reluctantly agreed. They gathered in the cellar, lighting the melted candles and arranging the objects as instructed. Alex read aloud from the book, his voice trembling as he recited the ancient incantation. The air grew heavy, pressing against their chests. The growls turned into an unearthly roar, and the cellar was plunged into darkness. A figure began to materialize in the center of the room, a towering, shadowy form with hollow eyes and clawed hands. The Dweller had arrived. The entity's presence was overwhelming, its gaze piercing each of them. It moved with unnatural speed, its claws raking across Marcus's chest. He collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. The others screamed and scattered, but the cellar door slammed shut, trapping them inside. "It's feeding on us," Sophie cried. "Our fear is making it stronger." Alex, clutching the book, tried to reverse the ritual, but the words seemed to twist on the page, eluding him. Claire grabbed a candle and hurled it at the entity. The flame flickered as it passed through the shadow, doing nothing to stop it. The group's desperation reached its peak as the dweller picked them off one by one. Sophie managed to pry open a loose stone in the cellar wall, revealing a hidden passage. She and Alex dragged a barely conscious Dan into the passage, leaving Claire's screams echoing behind them. The passage led deeper underground, the air growing colder and the whispers louder. They stumbled into a chamber even larger than the cellar, its walls covered in ancient carvings. In the center was a pit, from which the growls emanated. Alex, clutching the book, realized the truth. The dweller wasn't just a spirit, it was a gatekeeper, and the pit was its domain. To seal the gate, a life had to be offered. "I'll do it," Alex said, guilt etched on his face. "This is my fault." Before Sophie could protest, Alex plunged into the pit, the book clutched to his chest. The entity roared, its shadowy form disintegrating as the pit closed. Sophie and Dan emerged from the house as dawn broke, their faces pale and haunted. The house stood silent, its oppressive weight lifted. But the cost had been unbearable. Months later, Sophie visited a museum to research the dweller. She found an old photograph of the Victorian house, dated 1892. In the window, a shadowy figure loomed. The house remained empty, but rumors spread of its haunting. Thrill-seekers and ghost hunters flocked to it, drawn by its dark history. And in the dead of night, if one stood close enough, faint growls could still be heard from the cellar beneath.